Ahsoka. What a great word, by the way. Just rolls off the tongue. Ahsoka. Very Japanese. Ahsoka is here. Disney's cure for the Star Wars cancer. And you know what? I'm glad that I waited so long to talk about this show, because actually, had I done this review 1 or 2 episodes deep, dare I say 3, I would be much harsher than I'm going to be, because the beginning of this show is terrible. It's a stumble. Everything is wrong. Everything is bad. And to be honest, it was extremely difficult for me to even turn on episode 2. Episode 1 was so uninteresting and unengaging, I legitimately did not want to watch the second one, but I'm glad I did, because after the second episode, I said, okay, I'll watch the third, and after the third, I said, okay, there's something happening here, and that continued, and as it turns out, it just got better and better, and that, by far, I will lay at the altar of an interesting and engaging story. Though certainly it doesn't start out all that interesting and engaging. We open with Ahsoka. The basic plot is the New Republic has taken over, the Empire is defeated, everybody's just kind of chilling, they're giving each other awards, life is good, but there are some bad Jedi afoot, and they are attempting to track down and find the long-lost General Thrawn. Now, if you haven't seen the Clone Wars, we don't know who anybody is, but at least they're trying to do something, so thank God for the bad guys for moving this plot forward. Now, before I start, I think it's important to establish the record here that I don't hate Disney for what they've done to Star Wars. I hate Disney, absolutely, for their soulless, corporate, bereft of personality and character and anything redeeming to them Disney remakes of their classic Disney Renaissance animated films. It's just disgusting. I hate Disney for that. I hate Disney for a lot of other things. But I don't hate Disney for what they did with Star Wars, because quite frankly, they went the reverse route of George Lucas. They took the shotgun effect.
Close your eyes, Marge. And now you're ready for a night on the town.
Okay, they aimed a shotgun at a wall and hoped that some of the pellets would hit. And you know what? Ultimately, they did. We got The Mandalorian Season 1 out of this, which is admittedly probably the best thing to happen since the original Star Wars trilogy. Andor is awesome, though nobody watched it because at that point everybody had been fed up with all the shitty Star Wars shows, but it is excellent and I recommend you watch that. And to a lesser extent, we got The Mandalorian Season 3, which I actually thought was pretty good. You know, it was fun, it was campy, it kind of existed inside of its own bubble, and I enjoyed it for what it was. Was it some kind of masterpiece that moved me? No, but it was a fun time. If you just take it on its own merits, I actually thought that was a very entertaining season of television. I wanted to watch the next episode. An interesting note here, you can absolutely just skip from The Mandalorian Season 1 to Season 3 and lose nothing. Season 2 was used as a launch point for a bunch of crappy Star Wars IP, which interestingly enough reminds me, I think the Ahsoka episode in Season 2 was the last one that I watched. I had completely given up on the show at that point. Which is why I might mention I did not have very high hopes for this show. I do not think Rosario Dawson can helm a show of this caliber. Why? Well, what the hell has Rosario Dawson been doing for 20 years? She was relevant back in the early 2000s, and I was not particularly impressed with her in The Mandalorian as Ahsoka. The same can be said for Book of Boba Fett. I didn't even bother to watch that show. Why? Because it was helmed by this guy. It's like nobody remembers the prequel trilogy. Okay, this guy couldn't hold up a stage play, and you're going to give him his own show? So no, I did not have high hopes for Ahsoka, but I wanted to watch it, and I'm glad that I did. Let's get the bad out of the way. The bad is pretty much everything, especially the first few episodes before the story takes over and engages your interest. I'm not even sure where to start here. The opening crawl is a bit of a disaster because you read it and you just don't really know or care what's going on. It's, the writing in general here is weak, as well as the dialogue. And the dialogue itself is particularly bizarre because It's like everyone speaks, and then there's a 2-second gap between the next person responding. You know, you could look at this from an altruistic future point of view that everyone legitimately listens to everyone and pauses and reflects and then responds with their response. But I look at it as just bizarre, clunky, and uninteresting. It's the virtual opposite of Robert Altman's MASH. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, that is a masterpiece movie from the 1970s set in the Korean War. And this movie is very unique. It's also regarded as kind of Altman style, where everyone is talking at the same time. Everyone is talking over each other. There's constant interruptions.
Up close, all crumpled up like that. They don't look like much, you know?
Hey, was he loaded or empty when he crashed?
No, he was loaded. So it didn't matter much. See the.
And yet somehow it works. It sounds terrible, but actually it's the most naturalistic dialogue you've ever heard in your life. It's very enjoyable. This show is the opposite of that. It's let me say a dry line, 2-second pause, next dry line in response. And it is just dreadful. I hate it. The next biggest problem this show had, especially in the establishing episodes, is I think it takes for granted that we should care about these people and care about these characters. You know, I am aware of the Clone Wars. For those of you who not, this was as I've heard many times through word of mouth or the internet or whatever else, this fantastic animated Star Wars show. In fact, as far as I know, it's regarded as basically the only good thing before Mandalorian Season 1 to come out of the Star Wars IP. But I did not watch it, though I heard it's good. This entire show is based on a follow-up from that animated series. Now, it's great if you've seen it, but I would guess that 90% of the audience hasn't. And when you watch this show, it's as if they had expected you to watch it and expect you to go, oh, look, it's Ahsoka. Oh, look, it's Sabine Ren. Oh, look, they're looking for Ezra Miller. But to me, this doesn't mean anything. You have to start these characters off from a place where we might grow to be interested and love them. And the show fails in this completely. I do not care about Ahsoka. I do not care about Sabine Wren. I especially don't care about General Syndulla, and believe me, we'll get to that. But before we talk about the cast, which is where the majority of the treasure and commentary in this show lies, I do want to talk about the setting. You know, it's interesting, especially once again in the early episodes. I assumed that a plague had come and wiped out 90% of the universe's populations. It's legitimately bizarre. Every set in this show seems like it should have 1,000 people walking around, but it is abandoned. It is empty. And quite frankly, I think the show would have been far more interesting had they mentioned that there was a horrific virus that killed all of the population. That would have been a cool story layer. Like, what's going on? What virus? What happened? But we don't have that. We just have giant sets populated by minuscule actors. And speaking of the sets, it reminds me that the Star Wars universe is so dependent on having the Empire as this evil enemy that the good guys must fight against. It's been an interesting experiment in a lot of these Disney shows showing the New Republic post-Empire. And the irony is that it, in a sense, can be worse than the Empire ever was. I still have not forgotten the Mandalorian episode where the guy is basically getting a lobotomy from the New Republic. How creepy is that? I think death is a better alternative. And, you know, I think it would make a fascinating show if they really explored this at a deeper level, where all of the sudden, you know, the good guys have won, the rebels have won, now they're left running an intergalactic government, and they fall into all the same trappings of power and corruption that the Empire did. You know, it's not that easy. And if it hasn't hit you in the face already, the Empire is clearly a representation of the imperialist, fascist British Empire that spread throughout the world, and yet I would take that any day over the creepy 1984-esque, bureaucracy-driven, pseudo-communist New Republic Empire. I think that one is infinitely more terrifying in its implications than the Imperial Empire ever was. And maybe the reason why I've been thinking about this so much is I think this is the first Star Wars show or movie where I am consistently rooting for the bad guys in pretty much every episode. They are by far the best and most interesting characters, and they seem to be the only ones actually doing anything. And since I haven't seen the Clone Wars, as far as I know, maybe Thrawn's a good guy. Maybe he's actually a savior. Maybe he's the freedom fighter to my terrorist coming to purge the New Republic before they start mass lobotomizing the population. Now, I want to say for the record here that I know I'm going to go crazy shitting on all these characters, but I want you to know that this show actually gets really good. I think the reason why I'm about to dump on everyone is the trauma that I've built up from the first 3 episodes. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka. So I think I sprang from hate to kind of a neutral position on Ahsoka in this series. And I think neutral is the perfect word for it, because I've never seen someone so dedicated to being so flat and unexpressive. It's actually kind of amazing. Her performance reminds me of Jay Davis in Stargate. If you guys haven't seen that, you are cheating yourselves. That's one of the best sci-fi movies ever made. And Jay Davis really is only remembered for that and The Crying Game, right? But let's talk about Jay Davis in Stargate playing Raw. She is channeling a very specific part of Jay Davis's performance, and that is when he's wearing the Raw mask. Okay, if you guys remember this, he's got this expressionless mask of an Egyptian god. He's only in those scenes for about 2 minutes wearing it, but it's like Rosario Dawson saw that, and she said, I want to do that for this entire show. And it's like you can wheel her around from scene to scene wearing that mask. Her face, like, if the entire world died, her children died, and find out she got cancer, is the same face she makes when she eats a lollipop. It's amazing. I've never seen someone so unaffected. So I'll actually give her credit for that. Sadly, I don't think it leads to amazing character building. And that does remind me, I believe it was the last episode I watched, there's a scene where it shows her as a, 13, 15-year-old fighting in the Clone Wars with Anakin Skywalker. And when the scene first presents itself, you're going, man, oh my gosh, it's this teenage girl. She's got a lightsaber. She's surrounded by all this death. And this would have been such a great scene to put at the very beginning of the show because it builds layers to the character. Instead of wondering why she's so dead-faced and unexpressive, all of a sudden you're like, wow, has the emotions been driven out of her by all the horror and war and the things that she's gone through? So I do think there was a big mistake there not to kind of set that up. And instead, for the majority of this show, we've got a relatively flat character. And as already mentioned, it's confusing to me why they hired her in the first place as someone who really hasn't done anything for the last 20 years. But as I said, as the show has progressed, I've gone from hating it to ambivalence. And there are far worse parts of this show than Ahsoka herself. And then, of course, Sabine Ren, another holdover from the Clone Wars that I didn't see, is kind of Ahsoka's yin to her yang, her ex-apprentice. And, I mean, she's okay. She kind of plays the rebellious teenage girl, grasping with moral decisions and what should she do. And, at the end of the day, she does seem to pick up that lightsaber and go into the fight like she's supposed to. And she's okay. But it reminds me of how the villains in this TV show are not only the main drivers of the plot, but they're just so much better than anybody on the good side. All right. And now let's talk about the elephant in the room, Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Hera Syndulla. Oh my gosh, where do I start with this one? Okay, I know that the internet is in love with that booty, the mommy milkers. I actually never really got that into her. I never really liked Scott Pilgrim, must I?
Do you like it? Do you like it, Scott? I call it Mr. and Mrs. Tenorman chili.
I don't remember her from much else except Sky High, which is like the ultimate cult classic kids movie. But nonetheless, I'm pretty sure she hasn't won any Academy Awards. For me, she is a disaster in this show. I'm sorry, and let's see if we can tackle this one problem at a time. First off, she's supposed to be a general in the New Republic Army, and I think that's a perfect example of how dystopian this future must be, because whatever the opposite of a general is, she absolutely exemplifies. She's like, she comes off like a bad night shift manager at Walmart who's been promoted to a level of incompetence. I cannot imagine a more ungeneral-like performance. Every person she interacts with, it's like, hey, dude, yo, what's up? It's like she didn't even read the script when she stepped onto the show. I don't understand what she's trying to do here, but it is absolutely terrible. Secondly, what is going on with this outfit? Okay, I know it is true to whatever it was she was in the Clone Wars, but I'm sorry, when you become a general in a government organization, you need to look like one, okay? She looks like a homeless biker chick that walked out of a bar at 2 a.m. or something.
General Solo, is your strike team assembled?
And can we talk about her emblem of office, this badge, this silver plate pseudo Las Vegas dice? What is this? I can't stop laughing every time it shows up on screen. What costume designer thought this was acceptable? What government thinks this is acceptable? Anytime she walks into town, I would expect the public to laugh at her and say, oh my God, can you get something that looks a little better here? I mean, once again, I'm rooting for the Empire if this is the best the Republic has to offer. And it does remind me of the one scene she basically has by herself where she's trying to convince this council of New Republic politicians that we need to follow this lead, we need to go find Thrawn. And she's about as convincing and suave as Galadriel from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, it's like a school kid talking to adults. It's such a bad and unwieldy, disgusting interaction, and once again reinforces why is this person a general. And speaking of this scene, it reminds me the one sensible thing she says, the most important thing that she says to this, of course, politically acceptably diverse cast of council members, is that the scattered remnants of the Empire will gather under Thrawn if he returns, and they will be a formidable enemy. So she says this, and then one of the counselors responds with this.
The Imperial fleet is scattered and broken. They have no centralized command.
Unless Thrawn returns.
Make your point, General.
That's the point. That's the point. If Thrawn returns, it'll be bad. That is the point. She just made the point, buddy. And it only serves to show me how bad the writing is in these early episodes. Like, it's almost as if things were filmed out of sequence. That is the point, buddy. Wake up! Okay, let's calm down a little bit here. Let's take a breather. Let's talk about some of the positive characters on this show and why this show turns out to be better than those first 1 or 2 or 3 episodes belies. So rounding off the good cast, we have David Tennant voicing Huang, the ancient Jedi master robot that constructs lightsabers and can train Jedi. David Tennant, a.k.a. the only good Doctor Who for like 5 decades. And you know what? He really puts a lot of heart into this performance, and it is a bad sign when the most expressive and heartfelt member of the cast is a robot that does not have a moving mouth. But thankfully, I think he saves some of the earlier episodes. He's putting in a great performance here, and he's one of the highlights, especially on the good team of the show. Now let's talk about them bad people. Okay, so first of all, you've got Ray Stevenson, who kind of came out of nowhere. I know he's been in other stuff, but not stuff that I've seen. And he puts in the performance of his life. And very sadly, if you don't know, he lost his life earlier this year. And that is a big loss for this show in total. And we are all sorry he's gone, because having finally discovered him, he's great. He plays this dark-sider evil Jedi who once was a good Jedi, and he adds a lot of layers and nuance to the role. He's very quiet, he doesn't speak much, but his presence says everything. And in the few lines he does have, they are genuinely good. They're intelligent. They're interesting. And he basically steals every scene he's in.
To kill her would be a shame. There are so few Jedi left.
Sentimental.
Truth.
And more importantly, talking about his lines, I think this is representative of there was passion behind this character. Whoever was writing the ultimate story of this show cared about this guy and made him an interesting player. And he absolutely exemplifies that. And as a side note, his skills with the lightsaber are awesome. What they've done here, I don't know if it was the choreographer or what, but he moves in a very kind of geometrical and very intentional fashion where he's holding the lightsaber and then he'll do this angle, that angle, that angle. And it reminds me really strongly of the ultimate fight scene between Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee, where Chuck Norris comes at him in this bizarre rectangular bop, 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 bop. And he's doing that here, and it's great. And, you know, speaking of that, I should have mentioned it earlier. It's important to talk about the action in this show. I think the action absolutely saves it in the earlier episodes and just gets better and better with time. And who doesn't like a good lightsaber fight? And I'm the last guy who really wants a ton of action, especially pointless action, giant battles, etc., etc. But there are some great action sequences on this show. I remember when I started to finally get into it, you've got Ahsoka going out in a space shoot, you know, using her lightsaber against TIE fighters. And it's ridiculous, but at the same time, sometimes ridiculousness is great. And even I, for just a moment, was taken aback by the sheer balls displayed here. I was like, oh, she's going out on the ship. She's going to use her lightsaber against... This is crazy. But it was great in that sense, so I'm happy. And strangely enough, it reminds me, I just had an interaction with a guy whose taste in what's good and what's bad couldn't be more different from my own. You know, I asked him about Star Wars, and he said, oh, yeah, I really like Kenobi because it had more action. And I was like, oh, my God, really? You know, this is not the kind of guy who'd be into Andor. But at the same time, the action here is really good. There is some great choreography. Everyone puts in a good performance, and it's definitely a guilty pleasure. On top of this, we have his apprentice, the ultimate cute, blonde, goth Jedi girl who the internet has absolutely fallen in love with. Once again, nothing to do with acting there. We just all love a cute girl in a show who wields a lightsaber. And you know what? She does a good job. And legitimately, I am so impressed, and it's in the trailers with the very first sequence where she does a cool little move with her lightsabers. It's awesome. A side note here, she may legitimately have autism. It may be intentional. Her lines are very, kind of stilted and she delivers them shakily, but it does add a nice layer to her character. And while I don't think she's nearly as interesting as Baylan Skoll, she's definitely not taking away from the show. And we set up kind of a duality here between Sabine Ren and her as the apprentices of the masters battling it out. We also have some lady as the evil witch, I guess, who is basically channeling Sindel from Mortal Kombat, but without anywhere near as much charisma. She's okay. She fulfills her function of the plot, and the function of the plot is basically to get to Thrawn, the really real bad guy. It does remind me, though, it's interesting, especially in the later episodes, this show is actually channeling some magic and high fantasy, which hasn't really been seen in Star Wars before, and I really do like the direction they're taking that. When they finally do get to Thrawn's planet, there's a coven of witches practicing magic, and it actually does not take away from the show. It adds an interesting layer to the element of Star Wars where we're mixing sci-fi and fantasy, and I really like what they're doing with that. Last but certainly not least, we have Lars Mikkelsen playing General Thrawn, who certainly has 6 hours of build-up leading to this guy, and you know what? He does not disappoint. He is kicking ass. I've only seen him basically in one episode, but he's putting on a cold, calculated, dangerous performance. In fact, there's a very specific interaction he has with the evil witch where he pauses for just the right amount of time. The kind of man with power will pause, and everyone in the room goes quiet because they're terrified of him.
Good. Prepare to attack squads. Wait for Lord Baylan's signal.
Should we not send more troops to support them?
During this exile, our numbers have dwindled. So, no, 2 squads will suffice.
And that reminds me of the creativity displayed in some of the later sets, because, when Thrawn shows up, his ancient Star Destroyer that he's been, riding in for the last 30 years or however long he's been disappeared has been repaired with gold, as are his troops, and it's building such beautiful layers into the story. Because you see his troops and their helmets, everything is old, it's disheveled, but it's been repaired with gold leaf, which is a specific reference, I would assume, to the Japanese art of repair. I think it's called kintsugi, where you take a broken vase, repair it, and then run the cracks with gold leaf, ultimately showing the beauty and imperfection. So this was very cleverly done, and I absolutely love it. So, a lot of shows lately in modern media basically start shitty and end shitty. There's no upward momentum, despite the fact when you look back a lot of shows and movies, well, no, not movies, what am I saying? Shows considered the greatest. Sometimes their first seasons, even their second seasons, are big stumbling blocks, and they keep getting better and better with time. With Ahsoka specifically, the first few episodes, disaster, but continually the story is grabbing you. Continually the performances and the writing seems to be getting better. So I can't recommend enough. If you're a Star Wars fan, if you're a sci-fi fan, I say give this show a shot. One more comment. I remember when I first started getting really interested is when the plot really starts happening. They go to a planet and you see this giant circular Stargate. And they specifically reference that this is a device that is used to traverse the distances between galaxies. Now, this set my mind on fire because it's a really interesting subject. When we look at the vastness of the universe, the galaxies themselves have billions of stars, and then there's 10 trillion light years between each individual galaxy. And this opens up a whole world into Star Wars, and you're thinking, wow, what an interesting concept. Okay, so we're traversing and going into an actual another galaxy. You do need some kind of crazy device to get you these trillion light years across. And sadly, as it turns out, the entire Stargate just moves itself. When you first see it, you assume that it's going to be a ship going through the hole. And it's too bad because when I was thinking about it, it was so interesting. I was like, wow, what a great just book by itself this would make. It takes a tremendous amount of resources to build this, and then you send a ship through, and you send supplies through to build another one to get back. You have to triangulate perfectly just to get you there, and then you don't know what's going to be on the other side. Maybe you end up in a hostile alien situation and you're just instantly killed, and the people who've built the gate won't even know for 10 years. They've sent all these resources through, and they expect you to come back in 10 years once you've built another one, and you never do. So maybe that it's such a dangerous and risky undertaking that it's only been attempted a few times before. Sadly, this doesn't end up being the case, but I just wanted to comment on that because it was such an interesting thought in terms of sci-fi and technology. But anyway, these are the things in the show that really interested me, and if you're still watching this video, go give Ahsoka a chance. I'm going to try to review either both episodes individually or just the end of the series. And if you've made it to the end here, you've enjoyed yourself, consider subscribing so I can get monetized. I can make my wife love me again. But thank you for joining me in talking about Ahsoka. And you people have a good day.